Let's talk to Kevin Schofield. Very good morning to you, Kevin.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, as they say on social media, I don't think that was the flex he wanted it to be, because it turns out the Bank of England have declared that this budget has basically killed off growth in Britain.
Yeah, and this is obviously much more significant than the Conservatives or Reform criticising the budget. This is the Independent Bank of England. You know, these guys are the experts, and if they say that the budget has killed off growth, or at the moment it looks like it's killed off growth, then you have to sit up and take notice. And it just put a bit of the tin lid really on what's been a pretty grim week for Rachel Reeves. We've already had confirmation that the economy shrunk in October as well as September, and that inflation ticked up by more than was expected. So yeah, it's been a pretty bad week, and they're going to have to hope and keep their fingers crossed over Christmas that they get some economic growth pretty soon. And
let's not forget that, you know, this is entirely contrary to what they said would happen. You know, they said when they came into power in July that Britain was going to become the fastest growing economy in the G7, and they wanted it to be going like gangbusters, according to the Office for National Statistics. And now it's completely done the reverse of that, and they're in kind of stagflation territory and stagnation. So, and nobody that I speak to on an economic level thinks it's going to get any better for at least a year.
No, and there's been numerous surveys by business organisations about the budget, and they all say the same thing, that the rise in employers' national insurance has damaged confidence. It's made it much less likely that they'll employ people or give decent wage rises to their employees, which obviously has a knock-on effect for the economy and economic growth. Now, Keir Starmer was asked again yesterday in front of the liaison committee of senior MPs whether it was still the government's position that by the end of the Parliament, the UK will have the fastest growing economy in the G7 of advanced nations. Well, he said that that is still the plan, but it's not. They've not got off to a great start, and if they are going to meet that target, as I say, they're going to have get growth next year as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think they're taken by surprise by all of this? Because, you know, Keir Starmer doesn't like to admit that he's made any mistakes, and he was talking to Harry Cole earlier this week from The Sun, and he kind of avoided the question when he was asked, do you think you've made mistakes? Let's have a look what he said to the liaison committee yesterday.
Is there anything that you would do differently if you were starting out now, knowing what you know?
No, we had to do tough stuff. We're getting on with it, and I'm very pleased to be delivering from a position of power rather than going around the division lobbies losing every night. I've had too much of that.
Well, thank you very much.
It's almost as though he's kind of living in a parallel universe. I mean, I get the fact that he doesn't want to admit that he's made mistakes, and I get the fact that for some people that's difficult. But, you know, he's not delivering anything, really. When he talks about delivering, what does he mean?
Yeah, I mean, you speak privately to senior figures in the government, and they will admit, for instance, that the winter fuel payment announcement certainly could have been handled more differently, and it probably was a bad choice in the first place. I mean, that was within days of entering government. He set down a marker that they were taking winter fuel payments of millions of pensioners, and they've never really recovered from that. They've been on the back foot ever since. So there's been numerous missteps, I think, since they came to power. I mean, I do accept up to a certain level that things were worse than they thought, but we knew things were bad. It's not as if it came as a massive shock that there wasn't a lot of money around when they took over. So I think it's safe to say that if you only have to look at the opinion polls, that confirms it, that people are less than impressed by the start they've made. That's nearly 6 months now. I think the time for blaming the last government has come and gone, and now people are looking to Labour to actually come up with some solutions to the country's many problems.
Yeah, and also this kind of theory, Dan Hodges purports to deliver it, of kind of, you know, front-loading expectations, as they call it, which means that, you know, we basically announce a load of terrible things that people don't want in the early part of the government, and then by the time we get to the next election time, people will have forgotten. Even Dan Hodges this week said to me, you know what, people aren't going to forget this, and he, in particular, was very critical of the Waspi women decision that was made this week, and that seemed as well to sort of come out of the blue, almost as though they want to kind of self-harm. Like, they didn't need to do that. They didn't need to break their promises. Some people even think that the decision's the right one, but because of the way that they had said that they weren't going to do it, it's kind of blown up in their faces again.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help that they've explained it in a rather technocratic way. About 90% of pensioners affected knew about it. I don't think that butters any parsnips if you're one of the pensioners that's losing out as a result. I think maybe if they'd been a bit more upfront and said, look, yeah, we did promise it in the past, but we've come in, we've looked at the books, and unfortunately, as much as we'd like to help, we can't, and we're very sorry about that. But it wasn't dressed up in that type of language. And it just, there's a lesson there. You can jump on as many bandwagons as you want in opposition, but if you get elected, then people will look to hold you to the promises that you made, and if you don't keep them, then you're in a whole lot of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely right. And so the next, we've had the first 6 months, so the next 12 months, I suppose, is going to be the focus of what people write about over the course of the next few days. There'll be week-in reviews coming up. There'll be, the year-in review coming up. There's nothing good on the horizon for Keir Starmer, is there?
Well, not really. The first thing he's got to contend with is Donald Trump entering the White House in a few weeks' time. We know this morning that they're going to make Peter Mandelson the ambassador to Washington. His job will be to try and establish good relations with the Trump administration and try to persuade them not to put tariffs on UK imports. That could obviously have a massive economic impact. Then we've got local elections coming up in May.
Are they not trying to cancel those?
Well, some of them may well be cancelled, but some will go ahead, and it'll be all eyes on reform to see how they do, because if they make serious progress at the expense of both Labour and the Conservatives, then that creates a narrative, that Nigel Farage is on the march. So that will be bad news for Keir Starmer as well. It
will be bad news for the Tories too, won't it? Because we've got a kind of situation whereby I was talking to some people last night at a do I was at, where the Tories were kind of a little bit lost. They're not quite sure where they're going. They're not quite sure where Kemi Badenoch is. Again, she was a little bit, shall we say, underperforming, if you like, at Prime Minister's questions. She's been over to America to meet up with J.D. Vance and talk about, forging alliances with the Republicans. But, there's a sense that reform are more or less now the kind of the opposition, which sounds ridiculous, there's only 5 of them, but they're making a lot more noise than anybody in the Tory party's doing.
They are, yeah. It's not difficult, I'm sure you've done it yourself, to find Conservatives who are a little bit underwhelmed, shall we say, by how Kemi Badenoch has done thus far. She hasn't really seemed to get into her stride. Now, it is still early days. She's only been Conservative leader for 6 weeks, so you've got to give her a bit of time. But the early signs aren't encouraging if you're a Conservative MP or a Conservative Party supporter. And she's clearly got an eye on reform as much as she's got an eye on what the government are up to, because at those local elections, they're starting from a reasonably high watermark. The last time these seats were contested were at the height of Boris Johnson's vaccine bounce in 2001. So the Conservatives actually did pretty well. So they've got quite a lot riding on it, and there's a good chance that they'll go backwards considerably, whereas reform could well make serious progress, and that could pile more pressure on Kemi Badenoch as well.
Right. And Peter Mandelson, I suppose, one of the few Labour apparatchiks who hasn't insulted Donald Trump, so it's probably quite a good move to put him in there, I suppose. And he's quite a clever operator, whether you like him or not. He was a very sort of key part of the Blair administration, a key player in the Blair administration. What do you think he'll bring to the party?
Well, I think what they're relying on is his experience when he was a European Trade Commissioner in Brussels, between leaving the House of Commons and being named a life peer to become a cabinet member under Gordon Brown. He had 4 years in Brussels all over the trade policy, so he knows it inside out, and I think that is going to be key, really, because, as I said earlier, Labour are desperate to try and avoid any economic damage from Donald Trump's policies, primarily putting tariffs on imports. So he will be expected, Peter Mandelson, to get in there, get inside, get well on side with the Trump administration and persuade them to look kindly on the UK when it comes to those tariff decisions. But yeah, a lot riding on it, and I think probably on balance it's probably quite a good appointment. Yeah, it could have been worse, I suppose. Let's put it that way. Kevin, good to talk to you. Have a good Christmas. Thanks very much indeed. Kevin Schofield, political editor of the HuffPost UK.